So you just saw a lot of images that are typical images when people describe hell. They are burning fire, wasteland, people hurting each other, all that. Well, a lot of those images are not from the Bible. Those images come from Dante's Inferno, which is a poem written in the 14th century describing hell. And in that poem, and this is developed in history, there's a lot of judgment and punishment from God. Now, I want you to think about this idea. Maybe in this world, you could think of God doing some sort of punishment to help us get on the right track to go to heaven. We could think about that in terms of a parent perhaps punishing us. But a God that punishes us for eternity, for not following him, for not doing what he told us to do, what kind of God would that be? Swedenborg say that would be an evil God. I mean, think about it. It really would be. If there's a God that says, if you don't do it my way, I'm going to punish you for eternity. Wow. That's a God I don't want to worship. And I just believe, pray, and everything else that God doesn't exist. Doesn't make any sense to me. So Swedenborg says this. Some people cherish, this is interesting, he says, some people cherish the notion that God turns his face away from people, spurns them and casts them into hell, and is angry against them because of their evil. Some people even go so far as to think that God punishes people and does them harm. Now, before we get to the next quote, he says some of this shows up in the Bible in the sense that there's a lake of fire in the Bible. There's a place of wilderness talked about in the Bible. But all of these images, again, if you go back to seeing a deeper symbolic meaning, fire can symbolize hatred or lust, as we'll see a little bit later on. Wasteland, we've already seen, could be a wasteland in our minds and hearts. So all of these images that show up in the Bible just take a little deeper, as Jesus wanted us to do in his parables, so that we can see the real truth behind them, not some physical place of punishment. I remember one person who came to me who found Swedenborg's works, came out of a very fundamentalist background, and he said, you know, the thing is, I could not get over the fact that from the religion that I was in, hell was God's private torture chamber. Those words really made me think. Is that what hell's about? No. So Swedenborg says this. Anyone whose mind is enlightened perceives this while reading the word simply from the fact that the Lord is goodness itself, love itself, and mercy itself. Good itself cannot do harm to anyone. Love itself and mercy itself cannot spurn anyone, because this is contrary to mercy and love, and is therefore contrary to the divine nature itself. So people who are thinking with an enlightened mind when they read the word perceive clearly that God never turns away from us, and that because he does not turn away from us, he behaves toward us out of goodness and love and mercy. That is, he wills well towards us, loves us, and has compassion on us. Now, again, I just want you to think about, we took it right back to the beginning, the first class that we had, talking about why are we here, why were we created, that God, a God of love, created us to be objects and receiving vessels of that love, gave us the freedom to either become loving, heavenly people or not, but the goal of creation is a heaven from the human race, where we freely choose to come into a relationship with God and with one another. So love created us, and love is there to guide us. So Swedenborg also says, since we are at fault for our evil, it is we, not the Lord, who lead ourselves into hell. Our whole volition and love stays with us after death. People who have intended and loved what is evil in the world intend and love what is evil in the other life. And then they no longer allow themselves to be led away from it. This is why people who are absorbed in evil are connected to hell and actually are there in spirit. And after death, they crave above all to be where their evil is. So after death, it is we, not the Lord, who casts ourselves into hell. And there's just one more quote that's even stronger than that. Spirits who are absorbed in evil resist strenuously and virtually tear themselves away from the Lord. They are drawn by their evil, by hell, that is, as though it were a rope, And because they are drawn and want to follow because their love of evil, it follows that they freely cast themselves into hell. Now, the interesting thing about that, is that God pulls us so much toward himself, and yet we can tear ourselves away if that's what we choose. Well, what do I gather from this? I think there's a couple of things here to see very clearly. And one of those, again, is it doesn't matter what kind of good things you do. That's not going to get you into heaven or hell. It's not what you believe that's going to get you into heaven or hell. You can have any membership card to any religion you want, but if you're a bad person, you are gravitating and casting yourself into hell. But the good news is, and this is true across the board, is that nobody goes where they don't want to be. Nobody goes where they don't want to be. So wherever you end up, and it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Wherever you end up, that's where you want to be. So people aren't thrown into something or lifted up into something or made to do something that they don't want to do. Now, are people in hell happy? No. What Swedenborg says is happiness and goodness go together. Happiness and love go together. Happiness and being useful and heavenly go together. But evil spirits can have pleasure. They can, there's pleasure in what they do. Just like in the physical body, we can have pleasure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we are happy. Now, I'll give you just one example. This is not an evil. It's actually, addiction is addiction, a crime, but just it makes a good example is someone who is addicted to a drug like heroin or something like that. They can experience pleasure, but I don't know one heroin addict, well, probably there are, but reformed heroin addict that ever said to me, and I know many, from that work in that field, whoever said to me, you know what, I was genuinely happy when I was addicted to heroin. No, it's a miserable life, but they have the pleasure that they get from it. Now, again, addiction is not an evil. It's not a sin, something we choose to do, to hurt people. It's something completely different. But evil is addictive. And the more we get involved in evil, it does bring us pleasure. And that pleasure is real, but that pleasure doesn't lead to happiness. It actually leads to emptiness. I think in Swedenborg's hell, the real thing about it is, okay, it's not a place of incredible torment and things like that, but it's a place of eternal frustration because evil, selfishness are frustrating. Now, I just want to say one more thing, and that is to really emphasize again this idea that we can take what's in the Bible a little bit deeper. Jesus does talk about in hell the fire and gnashing of teeth. That's what's going to happen there. These images, gnashing teeth. I get the students to gnash their teeth for a second, and they don't even want to do it. It's so harsh, to do. But that fire, again, in hell, yes, there's the fire of hatred, enmity. There's the fire of lust. You could see in those videos as well. That's the fire of hell. And the gnashing of teeth is the clashing of our ideas in hell, the clashing of values, the clashing of our worldview together. Unfortunately, we see that a lot on the news and in the world, and we experience a lot in our lives. In hell, that clashing is something that happens every day. It's something that happens because people are selfishly leading themselves to a place of falsity and false ideas. So that's hell. And I think the one thing that you could see is you're not going to go there unless you want to, all right? And as Curtis Childs might say, if we looked at the big picture and what people who have had a near-death experience have said to everything that we've read, hell may not be the worst place compared to some religions, but isn't the best place either. So that's hell. It may not be Dante's Inferno, private torture chamber of God, or some place that we're punished forever and ever. Maybe we can have some pleasure there, but certainly we can't have happiness. And I can hear Curtis Childs from Off the Left Eye saying something like, well, hell may not be so bad, but clearly hell isn't so good either. But the best thing of all is that heaven, hell, both of them, they're our choice. And that choice begins now.